Sunny day, sweeping the clouds away. I'm Michael Smerconish in Philadelphia. Yes, it's a childhood classic, but it turns out that Sesame Street is at the center of a much bigger conversation about how your tax dollars are spent and who decides what stays and what goes. Because right now, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, is on the brink of being dismantled by the Trump administration. Late Friday, a federal judge temporarily blocked the administration from putting at least 2,200 aid workers on leave just hours before those employees were set to either go on infinite leave or get fired. CNN had reported that the agency planned to keep fewer than 300 of USAID's 10,000 workers as essential personnel. Labor groups have sued President Trump to stop him, calling the slashing of programs, people, and funding an unconstitutional power grab that only Congress can authorize. But they warn that the impact is already deadly, halting malaria prevention, stopping HIV clinical trials, and leaving humanitarian workers jobless overnight. Trump says he doesn't need Congress. He calls USAID a viper's nest of waste, fraud, and leftist bureaucrats who hate America. Politically speaking, I think for Democrats it's a losing issue. They're perceived as being on the side of the federal bureaucracy, profligate government spending, and foreign aid. It's not enough to say that it represents only 1% of the budget when 1% translates into $25 billion a year. And the sound bites, they're just political kryptonite. It's all reminiscent of the late William Proxmire, Democratic senator from Wisconsin. There's a reason why he was the longest-serving senator from the state. Remember the Golden Fleece Awards? His annual tributes to government waste, they're the stuff of political legend. One award, it went to a $50,000 study on the sex life of screwworms. You couldn't make it up. Another, in 1975, Proxmire gave a Golden Fleece Award to the Federal Aviation Administration for spending $57,800, that's $289,209 inflation adjusted, to study the measurements of 432 airline stewardesses, including the distance from knee to knee while sitting and measuring the length of the buttocks. Well, USAID, politically speaking, is all that and more. Here are some examples from the White House website under the heading, "At USAID, Waste, Fraud, and Abuse, They Run Deep." $1.5 million to promote LGBTQ inclusion in Serbia. $70,000 for a DEI musical in Ireland. $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. But is it all so black and white? Consider Bert and Ernie. Senator Joni Ernst, a Republican from Iowa, thinks she found one example of that so-called waste in Sesame Street. She's slamming USAID for funding a $20 million Sesame Street program in Iraq, saying taxpayers shouldn't be footing the bill for a children's show half a world away. But is that a fair characterization, or is this actually a prudent use of foreign aid? Alan Simsin, as it's called, isn't just a TV show. It's the largest early childhood intervention in humanitarian response history, supported by not just USAID, but also the MacArthur Foundation and Lego. It teaches literacy, inclusion, and critical health lessons to children in places torn apart by war. The show has made quite an impact since its inception. Global Compact on Refugees reports that as of October of 2023, the program has reached over 2.47 million children through direct services and an additional 27 million through its television show. Across the Middle East and North Africa, its Wash Up program, a collaboration between Sesame Workshop and Work Vision, helps prevent deadly waterborne diseases, there a leading cause of death among kids under 5. A report from UVA shows the program has been implemented in 15 countries, directly engaging over 200,000 children. Evaluations indicate substantial improvements in participants' knowledge and behaviors related to water, sanitation, and hygiene. There's a name for this type of initiative. They call it soft power. The term soft power was coined by Joseph S. Nye, Jr. He's a former Pentagon official, former dean of Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He served in President Bill Clinton's administration. He described how countries can use culture, foreign aid, and influence instead of force to achieve their goals. Hard power, the kind President Trump has preferred, is military force, its sanctions, its strong-arm tactics. Soft power, that's Hollywood movies, blue jeans, and yes, Sesame Street, all intended, as Peter Baker of the New York Times describes, fuel America's popularity around the world and thus its influence. The United States could sometimes get what it wanted, the theory went, because other countries aspired to be like the United States or be its friend. And history shows that it's often more effective long term. Nye himself said, in the short term, hard power usually trumps soft power, but the long run effects might be the opposite. Or as a caller to my SiriusXM radio program said yesterday, who would you rather teach Iraqi kids, Big Bird or Al-Qaeda? Disease prevention helps us all. Education, that fights extremism. It brings me to today's poll question at Smerconish.com. Can't wait to see how you'll vote on this. Are you comfortable with your tax dollars funding USAID soft power initiatives such as Sesame Street in Iraq? The controversy surrounding USAID is just one of a laundry list of things that have happened this week. Joining me now to speak about them is Democratic Senator from Delaware, Chris Coons. Senator, welcome back. Nice to see you. Is funding Sesame Street a judicious use of soft power?
Well, Michael, the way you put it is the way I hope folks considering your poll today will think about it. This isn't just funding a kid show for children, millions of children in countries like Iraq. It's a show that helps teach values, helps teach public health, helps prevent kids from dying from dysentery and disease, and helps push values like collaboration, peacefulness, cooperation in a society where the alternative is ISIS, extremism, and terrorism. And to your point, it's pennies on the dollar. The U.S. Department of Defense has an annual budget of about $850 billion. USAID was spending about $30 billion. It is a small proportion of our total federal spending. And as Joe Nye would often say, it's not just soft power, it's smart power. Let me leave you with one other quote, Michael, if I could. Jim Mattis, who was a 4-star Marine Corps general and Trump's Secretary of Defense in his first term, in a hearing back then said, if you slash development and aid spending, then I'm going to need more bullets for our troops.
So I think you make salient points. It took me 5 minutes, though, in my opening commentary to make the case. I also said, politically speaking, it's a losing issue for Democrats because in a soundbite-driven world, it's so easy to deride how much we were spending on an LGBTQ opera in Bogota. How do you respond to that? How do you deal with this?
Well, first, this is part of the challenge of governing in the short attention span era, where a brief tweet from Elon Musk or Donald Trump often trumps a 2-minute or a 3-minute explanation. The numbers on those kryptonite examples you gave were 50,000 here, 80,000 there. And the numbers that matter are in the millions. President George Bush launched a program in Africa called PEPFAR. It has saved 20 million human lives, and it's helped stabilize countries all over the continent. And yes, it's true, many of them have become our close allies and friends as a result. China today is on the march, is expansionist, and is investing in partnerships and friendships around the world. They're thrilled that we're abandoning the field. And Russia and China are already celebrating the death of USAID, reaching out to countries we've abandoned, and offering to take up programs that we've set aside. That'll have an impact for our security. The other thing I'll mention briefly, Michael, is public health. Right now, there's an Ebola pandemic outbreak in Kampala, Uganda, and a Marburg outbreak in Tanzania. These are deadly, potentially pandemic diseases. It is much cheaper for us to invest in nurses and clinics and healthcare to contain those pandemics in Africa than to risk someone getting on an airplane, coming here, and spreading it in the United States, where we'll spend billions responding to just a few cases. I think we are safer and stronger when we push back on terrorism and ISIS, push back on China and Russia, push back on pandemics around the world through the soft power outreach of nonprofit partners to USAID like World Vision, Save the Children, and CARE.
You referenced Elon Musk. Let's go there next. So half the country wants to see a reduction of the size of government. We tried it the conventional way. 15 years ago, it was called Simpson Bowles. It never even got to a vote in the Congress. So what do you say to the people who they might be unsettled about this approach, but they like the work being done?
Everyone likes the idea of cutting the federal bureaucracy and cutting federal spending until it impacts them. And when Elon Musk said he's going to chainsaw the federal government and take $2 trillion out of spending, I'm dying to see where he's going to cut spending that won't impact average Americans. USAID, as you just said, Michael, was an easy target because it mostly impacts our safety and security through things done overseas. But he's now going after the Department of Education, Veterans Administration, the Department of Defense, Social Security. He and his Doge boys, the young men from the Department of Government Efficiency, which is neither a department nor an elected part of our overall administration, they've burrowed into massive federal databases that contain the tax returns and the personal information of millions and millions of Americans. Once payments that go to Americans, like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, start getting cut off, once grants that go to police departments, fire departments, child cares, daycares, and senior centers start getting cut off and frozen, Americans are going to notice and they'll be upset.
Right, but I guess my point is something needs to be done. Michael Peterson at the Pete Peterson Foundation, the folks who are concerned, I think appropriately so, about debt and the size of our debt, he told me in an interview last year that by 2050, half of our revenue is going to go to debt service. I mean, we're facing a catastrophic situation. It's not a sexy issue. It doesn't seem to get the American people fired up. But take our last 30 seconds and speak to the national debt.
So Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, last night released his plan to spend $500 billion more. We have to have offsets, and we have to have a path towards balance. It doesn't involve just spending more. It also involves bringing in more revenue and spending less. That's a challenge for all of us, but the way to do it is not with a chainsaw. It's through the regular process of governance.
Senator Coons, thanks. Nice to have you here.